Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
And with full ecosystem development, you have mobile devices, you have hardware devices, you have firmware, comms protocols, cloud, across the board. So there's just a lot of details that need to be taken into account. And typically, any given client has a strength within one of those areas, but not necessarily across the board. So we need to figure out how we can help fill those gaps and educate them along the process as to why we may or may not make different decisions.
It's one thing to be in a Kickstarter fueled startup developing your IoT product, and quite another to be doing it within a structured corporate environment. Things get in the way. Priorities, personalities, politics, and executive management. The same work needs to be done, but other considerations need to be taken into account. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I speak with Jake Fields about his experience in working with IoT teams within the enterprise environment and the development steps to take to successfully make it through to the other side.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is for business leaders and managers employing the Internet of Things for their business or the business of their customers. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair, and I interview the industry's leading authorities to find out how they use IoT to improve business and create value. If you like this show, subscribe to it on iTunes and go to iotinc.com to check out my complimentary articles, videos, meetups, and webinars. The final episode of Season 1 of Pivot is here from our sponsor, GE Digital. We've been following Ethan and Sam on the podcast from the beginning of their industrial internet journey, all the way back to the earthquake in San Francisco that first brought them together. I hope you've been following along. For me, it's been both fun and educational. In this episode, they finally have funding, but it doesn't all work out the way they think it will. And they get an unexpected call from one of the podcast's biggest fans with some welcome advice on how to get started. You're not going to want to miss it, so get caught up with the earlier episodes, maybe do a little bit of binge listening by going to the podcast section of www.iot-inc.com and stay tuned for more information about Season 2 coming up in 2016. I'm looking forward to it. Also, it's been my pleasure to have been teaching my IoT workshops around the world. Well, if you want to see me live, I'm going to be starting my US roadshow called Iot World Academy in the first weeks of December 2015. This will be a series of 2-day intensive workshops starting off in Chicago and the Silicon Valley. By the end of the course, you'll be prepared to build your own IoT business and product line. For more information, go to the Informa website, IoT World Event, and you'll see the pull down for the Academy, or just go to www.iotinc.com/training. And of course, we'll have a special link in this episode's show analysis notes with a 25% discount code. So check it out. With me today on episode 35 is Jake Fields. Jake is founder and CEO of Treeline Interactive, a San Diego-based firm that specializes in the development for the Internet of Things, mobile apps, location-based services, telematics, and BLE. This is the first in a series of episodes on getting to your IoT proof of concept, which often entails working with a partner, such as a system integrator or a design house like Treeline. Jake, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So where did the name Treeline come from anyway?
Treeline, yes. So started the company probably about 12 years ago up in Lake Tahoe.
Okay.
Yes. So if anybody's a skier or snowboarder, obviously paradise up there. But, if anybody started a business, you have to come up with a name. And that's probably one of the more challenging parts of actually creating a business, especially if you have partners. But nonetheless.
Especially if you have partners. Yeah. Okay.
Treeline, for me, many people think of it as the top of the mountain where the trees stop growing.
Right.
Where I thought of it is a specific spot on one mountain where you can ski on the trail or you can ski in the trees where the powder is. So the tree line is if you go in and out of the charted and the uncharted land. So that's kind of how it rings true to me.
I like it. So why did you move from Tahoe to San Diego?
Good question. Tahoe is beautiful, but a small town after a while, and ultimately being in the technology space, there's only so much talent up there and so much room for growth. So we still get up there often. We have a number of clients that we work with, a lot of the ski resorts.
Oh, okay.
But San Diego has been a great spot for us in terms of technology growth and being close by a lot of the larger technology hardware and software companies.
Right. No, that makes sense. Well, why don't we get into the IoT side of things? Why don't you tell me about yourself, and your company?
Sure. So Treeline's been around, as I mentioned, for about 12 years now. And we originally started as more of kind of an interactive agency. We were doing web experiences, Flash, different types of front-end HTML stuff. And over time, kept pivoting the company, ending up kind of a little bit more in the mobile space. A little bit before the rest of the pack, and that allowed us to really play around with what can we do with a native mobile experience. Shortly after that, being in San Diego, we got approached by a couple different clients that had devices, and they were looking to connect their devices to these mobile apps. So that was pretty exciting for us. When the iPhone first came out, the promise was, hey, you're going to have this amazing phone, and you're going to be able to tie all these gadgets to it. It took a couple years for that to evolve, and probably 5 or 6 years actually. So that was exciting for us to get involved in, and that was probably about 5 years ago now, I guess.
Oh, okay.
The first project being a medical device that did wireless fetal ultrasound monitoring and tied back to an Android app.
Nice.
So it was pretty exciting to get involved in something meaningful and something that involved kind of a device that lived in the real world. That did a little bit more than just tell people about social media.
Right. So that was the genesis, I suppose. Although not quite an IoT product yet, more of a connected product. When did you start, I guess, getting into working on IoT products?
Yeah, I think that kind of just continued to evolve. That gave us a lot of expertise in the world of Bluetooth. So,
right.
That just has been a gateway for us, whether we're working with connected home type projects, whether we're working with beacon installations, if we're working with other, telematics type solutions. Bluetooth seems to be a core discipline for communicating with a lot of these IoT devices.
Well, yeah, okay. So you had me until you said telematics. So what type of projects are you working on? In Bluetooth or BLE kind of implies to me, more of a home, more of a localized. But then you said telematics, and I kind of lost you there. So what has been your focus? Unless it's really mini telematics, just around the house.
Just around the house. So that gets into a much broader conversation, I guess. But when I look at the world of IoT, I see the side of IoT for businesses. I see the side of IoT for homes. And the homes is really a central hub for people. Right. Another central hub for people is their vehicle. And sometimes that's in a business sense, and sometimes that's in a personal sense. So once you get into connected car land, you have another hub with all these spokes of devices that are now communicating and generating data and kind of, I guess, powering your life.
Interesting. Okay, so that's the BLE angle on the telematics side of things, meaning you're kind of like mobile. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Well, so I guess
a mobile home base.
A mobile home base, where we look
in California. You're definitely in that mobile home base.
Mobile home base, correct. And the projects that we've worked in that realm were start with the connected device side. If you're tying into a standard vehicle through the OBD2 port, you can connect. You can get all your vehicle data, and then what decisions and what do you power for the rest of someone's life or within their work experience based on what the vehicle has from a data sense. And that travels up the chain to commercial vehicles as well, whether you're looking at taxis or trucks.
Okay. So, that makes sense then. And then the BLE is really independent then. It's not so much for the vehicle work that you're doing is more, like you said, on the OB1 port or looking at what's happening with the vehicle, not so much connecting the person within it, or is that also part of it?
Can you clarify?
Well, the BLE, are you actually using BLE within the automobiles to have, for some sort of IoT experience for the person in their mobile home space or home?
Yeah, so I mean, you're connecting to the vehicle via Bluetooth, so
Yep.
the OBD2 port. You're using your phone as a sort of hub or relay to send the data back to the web. And that telemetry data can, trigger things for your home. It can trigger decisions in terms of what your gas spend is. It can also tie into different sensors within the vehicle as well.
Got it. No, okay, that makes sense. So you're connecting to your phone, and that's actually what you're using to connect up to the cloud and for your actual data transfer.
And for my world, looking at the world of Internet of Things. And looking at the world of connected devices, it's a pretty blurry line. So you might draw a more black and white line between the two. That'd be to hear. But they very much are interrelated in my land, at least.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think at least the taxonomy that I use is the connected product is allowing you to do that. Is to connect the product to, let's say, a mobile device or some other interface that's untethered to it. Then you have the smart products, that had a little bit more intelligence that could have been localized. But I think the evolution, at least the way I think about it anyway, the evolution to the Internet of Things product is you're actually utilizing the Internet for something more than just a conduit of transportation, of data transportation, using some of the horsepower, using maybe some of the storage, using some of the, I guess the analytics, which is related to the horsepower. So I guess I'm thinking that is actually, connecting that smart and the connected by leveraging the Internet of Things, and that could be also connecting up to other services, other data services. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's where you start to experience a little bit of the network effect. So while that may be the individual consumer experience, or business experience, you're then aggregating data from multiple nodes within your network. If you look at the vehicle sense, if you look at the home sense, and that's when things get really interesting in analytics land.
Yeah, and that's when you get that so-called network effect. The value being exponential, or at least squared than the number of devices. So what type of clients then do you generally work with?
So we are positioned as essentially a contract resource where customers from across different industries come to us to help work on solutions, and we also help incubate some solutions internally. So between the two, I think it spans a lot of the industries that I mentioned. But we're looking at anywhere from funded startups to enterprise clients that come in that are looking to usually incubate some sort of IoT or connected device project within their organization. Their existing resources may not be able to fully execute on it, and the flow of the corporate infrastructure may not be conducive to quickly executing on prototyping and product deployment.
I think that's a nice way of saying that the corporate environment is just too damn slow to get a product out the door.
Yeah, so we try to work with them relatively autonomously, leveraging key players and decision makers to kind of speed up the timeline. And we are not immune to some of the corporate flow, but we like to think we do a good job navigating those waters.
Geez, you become so politically correct after moving to San Diego.
Yeah,
it sounds like you're so well. I guess you don't want to offend anyone, but yeah, seriously, everyone that I work with in terms of whether they're a Fortune 100 company or they're a small company, generally there's a gap in that talent that you alluded to, and whether it's a complete gap where one of my clients, for example, they're a third generation family owned business that has a great product line, but they've got no tech. Or, one of my other clients, they're a very large corporation with tons of data scientists and so forth, but their data science is different. They're tackling different problems. Same with their software developers. And so, my recommendation always is there's a number of different ways that you can structure an IoT project within a larger corporation. But I think the small startup, build a startup within it is always the fastest way, as opposed to like a center of excellence or, some sort of advisory committee, because of what you're alluding to, and what I've experienced firsthand is just trying to get something, iterate on something and get it out the door. But so I guess what I'm saying is that for a lot of our listeners, to this show, they'll be in need for a company like yours, if it's a product based or a system integrator, if it's something infrastructure based or something maybe manufacturing based over larger areas. So this is important, and that's why I want to dig into it with you to understand, specifically for the audience, to understand what they need to do to be good customers, what they need to be, what they need to do to make sure that they, on their side of things, even though they may not have that skill set, and they're going to a company like a Treeline. I like to just talk about what they need to do to get the most out of that relationship. So maybe why don't we start with what are the steps that you take in creating an IoT product with a client? Maybe just take us through that process.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the first thing it starts out with is the relationship side.
Okay.
And we approach most projects is starting with a project strategist and a team manager, so that we can go in and start to do a discovery, understand what's really necessary and where you're looking to go. We have companies we work with that come with a very elaborate plan and things very well penciled out. We have other people that come in with a concept, and usually either case needs a lot of finessing to go ahead and figure out how we're really going to execute on it. So as with any technology product, it's all in the planning. So we try and dig in as deep as possible, immerse ourselves within the business. Because we work within many different verticals, we very often know very little about the business, which is both a pro and a con. It's helpful to give a fresh perspective, but we got to learn a lot of stuff and get up to speed. And it forces our partners to explain their business and how it works. So that's really a healthy exercise. And typically we put together kind of a dream scenario. What's the art of the possible in terms of where this product could go, and from there we start to nail down realistically what does an MVP look like, and going back down to that minimum viable product.
Okay, so at a high level, what you're saying is, and then correct me here, but step one, getting to know each other, and that is understanding what the requirements are, what the needs are, but then also understanding maybe what the project is. And you were saying that whether there's a plan or a concept, there's still a lot of finessing that has to happen. I want to get back to that. Step number 2 is that you start coming up with different scenarios, some dream scenarios as you're calling them. And then step number 3 is you're kind of whittling it down from the dream to more the minimum viable representation of that dream. Am I missing anything in those 3 steps?
No, I think that's quite accurate.
So you mentioned that some companies have a detailed plan and others, I guess, have a less detailed concept when they meet you, and so they need a little bit of finessing. What do you mean by that? What is generally missing from these plans or these concepts that you see?
Yeah, obviously it varies. Business model is a huge one, and often people have a concept of the business model, but not entirely sure how it will tie into the product itself. Other times, people have a large, high-level vision of how the product will work and what the business model will do, haven't quite figured out the pieces. When you're doing IoT development, you're typically looking at not full stack, but full ecosystem development. And with full ecosystem development, you have mobile devices, you have hardware devices, you have firmware, comms protocols, cloud, across the board. So there's just a lot of details that need to be taken into account. And typically, any given client has a strength within one of those areas, but not necessarily across the board. So we need to figure out how we can help fill those gaps and educate them along the process as to why we may or may not make different decisions.
Okay. So that's more of like I guess a resourcing issue. The first one, though, is obviously very interesting to me. It's almost the purpose of the show to a certain extent, is the business model is missing. But is there anything else from the plan itself? Knowing all the technology is why they're coming to you. But is there anything? I'm just trying to understand. When our listeners, go to a company like yours or yours. They need to get that business model nailed, or at least a directional vector for it. But is there anything else that you can, any other advice that you can give our listeners as to, what you're finding is missing in those plans or in those concepts?
I think it's...
Or is that the big one? That could just very well be the big one.
No, I mean, I think it's an iterative process because it's not necessarily hey, you're missing this whole area. But as you drill down, you start to compare different opportunities that we've seen across multiple IoT products. There's different ways to, monetize how people utilize data. There's different ways to monetize the data or the content that they're generating. There's different ways to monetize physical aspects of the experience, whether there may be consumable products involved. And even if you take a look at consumables, how can you take that a step further and maybe do things like auto fulfillment? Based on the data you have, people are consuming X amount of a product over a certain period of time. Why should something not show up on their doorstep before they order it because it's happening? So I think probably just taking out the business model and the concepts, a step further to take advantage of underutilized opportunities.
Okay, and that's something then I'm guessing that Treeline helps them with?
Correct. While our focus is, strategy and execution, we just try and take a look across the board. We take projects that we take pride in, and we like to help solve problems. So we're not going to stop at any of those areas of focus. We want to figure out how do we make this as successful as possible, because that successful customers means successful work, which means successful business, and everybody's happy. So that's
a nice virtuous cycle.
Yes. I mean, we typically work based on long-term arrangements, so it's not just build something and see you later. It's a matter of how do we establish a long-term relationship and set up businesses for success.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll echo what you said in maybe my own little way, but what I do when I work with my clients is that effectively we're looking at a lot of different parameters. We're looking at the industry, we're looking at the competitive space. We're obviously looking at the product, and within the product, an IoT product, all incremental values from that information, that you derive from doing something with the data that you collect. And so a big part of what I do with my clients, and this is my recommendation to the listeners too, is to start working on the business model, of course, but you're starting with value. You need to start with value, and then you need to understand how you're going to generate value with the product, work backward from there. That'll tell you the tech stuff, but more important, you need an information requirements document. You need to understand what information do I need to generate that value. And then when you come with that, plus a concept, plus a product, plus a business plan, plus the beginning of a business plan, that is when they can engage with a partner, I think, that will then take it to the next step. How do you feel about that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. Probably overlooked way too often, but that core value of the product is what drives it, creates retention, and allows people to actually continue to use things. So those are all the big pieces. And I guess the last one, which seems like it's early to consider in the planning process, but commercialization, how you're going to actually launch the product, get it into the world, get it into real hands, and be able to operate it as a business. Some of those components tie back into how the technology may or may not be architected.
Yeah, and I think this commercialization, if you look at it from a minimal viable product point of view, what you're going to want to do in this iteration that we talked about as well is you're going to want to have it in a form that you can visit a lot of potential customers, whether the existing customers of an existing product that you want to then enhance to make an IoT product, or there's something new. But I would presume, that this is going to be a very important, well, it is. I mean, this is an important aspect of the commercialization, is this iterative process. So you need to start thinking about which customers you want to bring the product to, who you want to put it in front of, because, again, that's one of the benefits of an IoT product, is just that you can quickly modify it because you're digitizing it. I mean, digitizing a piece of hardware, whatever that piece is, a product, a system, whatever the case may be. But that's interesting, is that, and I think it's an important but often overlooked part of the process, is thinking a little bit ahead. And who am I going to put this in front of? I mean, how do you help your clients with this, or do they normally have it sorted out, or what do you do to kind of do this iteration? Because you're not iterating. You can't just iterate looking at each other across a conference table, right? You need to get out in the field and you need to put it in front of in the hands of potential customers.
Yeah, I mean, testing is huge, and not just testing to see if the final product works, but iterative testing to see how people interact with it.
Right.
This is a new realm of computer interaction, right? It's within the real world and within spaces that people are used to dealing with in a very specific fashion. So seeing how these devices may or may not change things and make a more positive experience is important. If you're dealing with home sensors, how do people interact with lights that are automatic when things go awry and don't do as expected? Sometimes intelligence is less intelligent when managed by computers, and sometimes there's efficiencies. So that's the biggest thing, is putting it in the hands of real people. So the prototyping process is core. Even if you know what your end product should look like, the sooner you can get prototypes in the hands of users and testers, you get valuable feedback as to things you may or may not have expected.
Now, talk to me about the process that goes from your MVP to prototype, or am I conflating the two? I kind of think there's a process that goes there, or is in your mind or your approach, is it the same thing?
Typically, we're targeting an MVP to be able to launch with, and that's the first commercialization of the product. Within that process, we're going to have a prototype. We're going to have different revs of the product, and then we're going to go ahead and launch that MVP.
Right. And what's happening? Sorry, what's happening then before the prototype, or is that just the iterative stage that we're talking about?
It's iterative stages we're talking about. So putting together that product development plan, and this might be a very crude prototype, depending on what the product is. Often use things like Raspberry Pis or Arduinos to prototype portions of the products if it's a sensor-related device. You don't need to miniaturize it right away. So if we're gathering that data, piping it back to a phone or into a web experience, how do we start gathering data as quickly as possible and see what it looks like?
Right, and that's really important. Again, like you're saying, the form factor, just as long as the functionality is going to work like it is, but you want to get it in front of clients to do this iteration, to basically iterate onto getting that prototype, right? So eventually, I guess the beginning concept iterates itself into a prototype that you can then go to customers with, iterate on that, get to the MVP. Is that kind of the steps along the way?
Correct. And sometimes you're iterating on the functionality, but more often you're iterating on the interaction design, because you're dealing with that bridge between digital and physical products. Nailing that interaction design is really challenging, just because you're working on a lot of assumptions and then seeing how it plays out. One example that we worked with was a device for home health testing for influenza and testosterone and some other similar things. And the device itself was a little hardware unit that would live in people's homes, but it didn't have a screen. So it was a headless interface, and it just had a strip of runway lights. So people would interact with it using their mobile phone, and the lights indicate if a cartridge was put into the device correctly based on lights going one direction. If you need to inject the cartridge, the lights would go another direction. And that was environment we were working on, all without the final hardware device. So we're doing a lot of the software and prototyping short of the hardware needed. So that's another example where we not only made a prototype, but we made a simulator. One that simulated the output the device would send to a user. And then we even did a screen design, a second mobile phone that showed the runway lights. So you could tap it, see what happened with the experience, see what the visual indicators would be, and then you could walk away. Often with these projects, the hardware leg is the most behind or the most time-consuming, at least from an innovation standpoint. So if you're consistently doing the software development and you're waiting on hardware, you're the last guy in the relay race. So whatever you can do to get ahead of that cycle and test key assumptions as to how the hardware will interact with the device from a data and from user interface perspective is all extremely valuable.
So you're saying the hardware lags in terms of iteration speed? Is that what you mean?
Yes, typically.
And then, so how do you accelerate that speed for hardware?
Things are a lot faster now than they used to be. If you're sending out some boards to get printed, you can get things back within a few days. There's more local houses to be able to help support that. But again, often within the early prototypes, using existing devices that are out there, like your Raspberry Pis, allow you to hook up most of your sensors and components just within a demo environment. So you do enough so that you aren't delaying the other areas of the project. So you don't necessarily accelerate that period. You prevent it from becoming a blocker to the other tracks.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And so, okay, so I got it on the hardware side, like you said, Raspberry Pi, Arduino, some sort of off-the-shelf, low-cost hardware device that you can simulate or emulate the hardware component of it. Now, what about the back end? Are you using a platform, and specifically what I'm talking about is the whole networking side, the local network, then taking it up to the cloud and doing, whatever you're going to do up there. Are you using any specific tools there in the environment? Because at some point you're going to need to have a cloud component. You're going to need to have, potentially you're going to need to choose a platform to make this all happen.
Yeah, definitely. So we can go down to the local network in a second, but from a cloud perspective, it depends on the implementation. Some customers or partners we're working with already have some existing cloud that we're piping data to, in which case we are doing an integration project and integrating with their back office APIs. So those ones, it's relatively prescribed. In other cases, we're creating a relatively straightforward CRUD interface for monitoring logging data. In some other applications, we're looking at it from an analytical standpoint. May use something like Elasticsearch to basically send up data to a basic web service, pipe it over so that we can run kind of real-time analytics and see how people are interacting with the device or generating different sets of data, which would ultimately be migrated into a full-service web application. But sometimes you have to gather the data before you figure out what you're really architecting from the implementation standpoint.
So are you custom then building or coding basically this interface between the hardware device and up to, assuming that they don't have a cloud? I'm assuming if they have a cloud, if you're integrating to an existing cloud system, then it's maybe a BI system or it's something maybe where they're not doing any specific analytics there. It's more collecting data. But if you're creating a new cloud for them, are you hard coding this, or are you using some off the shelf? You mentioned Elasticsearch, but are you using some off the shelf, technology to make that happen?
Yeah. Again, case by case. When we are creating anything that's relatively custom, we're using existing frameworks so that we're able to quickly and efficiently set up APIs, endpoints, monitor data and services. We've used things like Parse to create simple backend services, and I'm not as familiar with the most up-to-date ones, but I know Amazon has some really great products that they've been putting out lately as well. Dealing with the queues and the management of all the data that's flowing is definitely huge to have the right infrastructure in place to manage volume, obviously.
Okay, all right. Who normally are you dealing with within the company? So who's putting up their hand? I guess in a larger company, who's putting up their hand saying, I want to lead this project? Is it generally a tech guy? Is it generally a business gal? What's the demographic, or is it kind of all over the place?
It is a little bit all over the place. Typically, there's like a middle to senior level champion for the project. Right. But more and more recently, we're seeing kind of C-level activity where executives are passing down the mandate. We need to be integrating our devices. We need to be more digital. We need to connect to the Internet of Things, which is huge in terms of eliminating barriers because everybody plays along. When you deal with a project that kind of comes from the grassroots management level and then moving up the chain, you typically have a lot more barriers in getting people to buy in and take the risks that may be associated with the project.
And so, along those lines, then, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing when developing these, the proof of concepts? Is it internal? Is it a corporate kind of political type challenge, or is it a preparedness kind of challenge, or what are the challenges that you're having to overcome to kind of realize these proof of concepts? Yeah,
as we've seen a lot of them, there's kind of early conceptualization and prototyping phases, and you need to get through that first gate to then move on to full production, which makes sense. But after proving that the concept is viable, taking that next step and saying we're going to invest significant amount of resources and capital is a much larger one. So that's when it ties back to the business model. What's our ROI going to be? How is this going to pan out? And, is this a CRM product where we're gathering data and going to increase the overall customer experience? And how do we quantify that long-term value? Someone's got to put their neck out there and say, yeah, this is the way we want to go and let's make this happen, versus products that are solely based on the product selling and people paying per device or per unit, in which case you're in the more of the product industry.
Okay. And I guess I got a couple questions there. Roughly speaking, for the types of projects that you're working on, to give people some parameters, stage one, you're saying that's basically pre-production. And it's what we've been talking about up to this point, is that conceptualization to the rapid prototype, to the iteration, to, the rapid prototyping and getting to a point where you have a prototype that you can take to customers. And then after that, assuming everything goes well, you're going to be making a larger investment to start doing the production of the product. What type of budget are we talking about? What should people listening to this podcast be thinking in terms of budgeting for phase one? I guess for stage one, how we're defining it here.
I think you're typically looking at somewhere around you're looking at tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. To be able to do, your initial explorations. When you get into actual prototyping, then you're, starting to spend at least a reasonable amount of budget to make sure that you have your systems in place. Because, again, you're not developing it just on the device side. You have to hit the firmware of the device and also the web application side of things as well to see any sort of, fruits of your labor. If there's a mobile application component, you're hitting that as well. So it all starts adding up quickly. It's very, specific to the type of product and how much custom prototyping is happening. But you can imagine things start accelerating quickly as you're actually getting real hardware developed.
So is that the biggest cost? Is that the inflection point within, and I'm going to say my experience is you're looking between. Again, it really depends on the project, but I think people should be budgeting between $50,000 and let's say $90,000, something in that range. Is the inflection point when you're starting to go from the Arduino type hardware to when you're actually designing your own and getting it it's still in very small quantities, but getting it created? Is that the inflection point when the costs start forming?
Not necessarily. I think you can get that stuff done now at a reasonable rate. You're looking at a lot more engineering because you're getting your boards designed and printed, and what your batch size looks like and all your parts. So you're still looking at iterative costs there. But once you go to the point of production, I think is where things really start accelerating. And that's typically when people are trying to get that final buy-in from the executive level. Or a smaller startup may be looking to do their crowdfunding or some sort of kickstarter campaign to say, okay, now we're getting molds made, now we're printing out everything and getting this product actually produced. That's the biggest, inflection point.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about, going from what we're calling stage one to stage two, or going from the pre-production to the production, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay, and let's talk timelines. What are you seeing typically from the time that you have a company come to you with a plan or a concept to the point where they're getting to that production, to the end of the cycle that we've been talking about? What type of timeline are we looking at?
I think realistically, you're looking at about a year. Just between the strategy, any sort of prototyping, back and forth iterations, and then being able to really move forward on a product. Typically things happen within the process that change. That's the nature of an iterative development. So I think between all of that, from start to finish, a year is a realistic timeline, but that varies substantially. If you're looking at a really simple sensor project, that's one thing. If you're looking at a project that has any sort of, medical tie-ins, you obviously have HIPAA and other regulatory pieces to deal with. So, I guess that's somewhere in the middle range number.
Yeah. No, but I think that's helpful, right? I think what you're saying here, or what we're kind of saying together is, budgeting, you're going to be budgeting over a period of a year around $50,000 to, let's say, $100,000 on average. Some will be less, some will be a little bit more, some will be a little bit less. And you should probably plan about a year's time to get to that point where you need to go into production, or I guess you need to jump over that big hurdle. What you're talking about is getting the funding to get to production.
Yeah, and
does that sound about right?
Yeah, and I'd also say that 50 to 100 really scales based on the type of organization. If you're looking,
what do you mean?
If you're looking at a startup type business with a relatively simple product, typically you're in that range. If you're an enterprise that's looking to move forward on all directions simultaneously, I think you can be looking at at least 5-10 times that easily. If they're looking to move into different iterations of industrial design, that's a whole area where tons of time and energy can go into. If you're looking into consumer and product testing, looking at your initial deployment groups, and if you're testing the product with 50, 100 people versus testing it with 5 or 10 people. So
that's when the costs start piling. You're saying
all these things can scale up substantially.
Mm-hmm. And what have you seen up to this point in time to basically get to that next step, to get to the production step, Jake? So what is the how are these internal teams making the justification? Is it strictly a business? Is it strictly a business case, a business model? They've gone to certain customers, they're getting certain buy-in, maybe even pre-selling it. What have you seen has been? And again, what I'm looking for here is for our listeners just to get, I guess, look down the road a little bit and think, what am I going to need to do, after this 1 year? Let's say it's roughly a year, but what am I going to need to start thinking about during that year so I can get to that next step and get to the production step? So what have you seen in terms of best practices, or what has worked in your in your experience to make that jump and get that okay to start moving into production, which means even a bigger investment?
Yeah, again, when you're looking at an enterprise, you always want to have a well-organized product with the roadmap plan and commercialization, but it's really driven by business needs. The business either needs the product or it doesn't, and that will significantly accelerate the process. If this is something where the competitor steps in and has a similar service or product, things move really quickly. You get buy-in fast. People are putting their neck out there a little bit more. It's a little bit more emerging tech. Decision-making processes kind of get stuck in limbo lands at times, and it depends on, company resources and, R&D budgets. So unfortunately, I think a lot of it has to do with external factors in politics. That's the nature of business, right? It's all these factors combined.
Yeah. So you're saying, in the ideal world, when there's no external forces, then you need to have that strong business plan. You need to have a commercialization plan. You need to have the early customers kind of lined up to make a decision, just like you make any other decision where it requires a big investment within a company. But what you're saying, and adding a little bit of nuance here, is if there's a competitor, that's going to speed things up. What are some other external forces, though? You mentioned competitor, and I think you were kind of implying there's maybe more than that, or is that the big one that's going to speed things up beyond the traditional way that you're going to take a product to market?
I think besides just competitor, it's market trends, and that's what we're seeing right now is the acceleration of market trends, and everybody has different types of smart devices. So whether it's not the competitor, it's the threat of the competitor, or just the ambition. But again, a lot of this stuff comes down from an executive level, and if you have a technologically savvy executive team, they're more willing to push and say, yes, we need this out there, and we have to adapt to the market, otherwise you're going to be left behind. And some businesses are still doing this at the web and data level. Other businesses are taking a step further and saying, okay, this is an extension of our web and data level, where we're gathering sensory data, we're gathering consumer behavior data from across the board. So I think it just takes a forward-thinking organization to continue to move forward quickly. Otherwise, you can get stuck in a nice exploratory project that never sees the light of day.
Yeah. Well, I want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier, and you were you were saying that you could look at this as an extension almost of your CRM. And I think that's what you're kind of just talking about now. Can you maybe expand a little bit more on that? Because that seems interesting to me as a way to justify kind of the product.
Yeah, definitely. A CRM is giving you an opportunity to continue to communicate with specific customers that you may not have. If you look at consumer level products, You could have a device within a vehicle that's monitoring people's usage levels and their fuel levels. So you may be able to encourage them to go fuel up sooner based on rates that you may have on a local gas station. So you know where they are, you know what their gas rates are, and you say, hey, you're a valuable customer, fuel up early and you're going to save money. So it gives you an opportunity to reach out and communicate with a specific consumer in a way you never would have been able to do so before. If you take that, you know, to a different market and say, okay, well, I don't have a car here, but I have a pet, and we have a pet activity monitor. That pet activity monitor may be something that's valuable for a pet company to have, because it allows the company to establish an intimate relationship with the pet owner,
right,
and understand what's going on with the pet's activity. The same thing applies to people as well, and we know how active people are and at what frequency, so that can drive the kind of the trends of what they're doing. So I think there's going to be a little bit more of a trend of lower costs or even free IoT type devices, where you're kind of buying in to give up your data to receive value back, so that people can give you offerings. And I'm not talking, you know, Google monitoring you from your smoke detector and listening to what you're saying, but I think there are widgets and gadgets that are helpful in our everyday life and things we do. Just as we use the discount cards at the supermarket, and we know that that's signing away the right to sell my shopping list. I sure as hell want that 10 or 20% off of my, you know, purchase price. So there's a balance there of what people are comfortable with and not, you know.
Right. Well, and it's an explicit trade, right? It's an explicit value trade, and you know, and then we get into the thorny issue, which we're not going to get into, you know, privacy and so forth. But I think you've hit it on the head in the sense that there has to be an explicit trade of value before before you feel comfortable with this information. But yeah, so you've brought up a couple interesting points, and most recently. So one is this intimate relationship that you have with a customer, and what you're saying is some companies are leveraging that because, gosh, you know, you're getting 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, you know, view into what the customer is doing, or you can, if you design your product this way, into what the customer is doing with your product. And then that implies what they're doing with other potential products as well. And I think that's what you're saying is that could be another justification. And this is kind of a series, I guess, is you know, looking at IoT just in a number of different ways, but one can be to provide efficiencies, you know, make things a little more efficient. So that's kind of more on the bottom line. You're squeezing out a little bit of efficiency. It could be incremental revenue, something you haven't had before. And then this is kind of in between. In a way, it's kind of using the IoT product to perhaps leverage existing business or maybe business with partners that you wouldn't have had through using this information. And we're kind of scattergunning it here a little bit in terms of the approach, but we're now looking, you know, again into the monetization strategy, and it's just interesting the way that you brought it up in the sense of tying it almost to the CRM, meaning our product's going to do this monitoring, and it's really important that we've got a good idea of what our customers are doing, because if we have a really good idea of what our customers are doing, then we can make them happier, and as a byproduct, we could sell more stuff. So I just thought that was interesting how you kind of framed it as a CRM, you know, kind of issue, just that relationship, that customer, managing that customer relationship, because it's something, it's something that's often, I suppose, overlooked when looking into this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, let's just end this with some advice. Maybe what have you seen, high level, you know, from successful companies that have worked with you versus unsuccessful companies? What's some advice you can give our listeners in terms of what do the successful companies do that the unsuccessful ones don't do?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a really strong champion or product manager. So someone has that strong vision. You had mentioned making sure there was a strong value proposition, and somebody that's willing to see that through and not be compromised by a lot of the different factors that may come up throughout the process. So that vision is huge. You know, discipline and focused on just doing something really well. It's easy to get into, you know, feature creep and say, oh, well, it can do this and it can do that. Sure. But that's where the MVP exercise is really big, to be able to get out doing something simple and then allow your consumers, allow your business partners to prescribe, the product path by saying what is really important to them, because it'll vary from person to person. And you really just need a collective view of what's going to be best for the next steps.
Right. So what you're saying is, a strong shepherd. And often that's going to be the person that raises their hand. It's going to be their baby, but they have to be strong because, like you said, they're going to face internal issues. They're going to face external issues, often a lot of internal issues, and get in front of the customer. Right? I mean, this is pretty basic stuff, but it's get in front of the customers, listen to the customers, and the big benefit you have with an IoT product is that, gosh, you can really listen to the customer, and it's not anecdotal; it is actual data, right? And so that is something, that I always advise is make sure that you're looking, again, what information do you want to get from your customer? Maybe that's even completely secondary to the product. But in this case, you're saying, let's listen to the customer. Is that the two big things? A strong leader with vision and listen to the customer is my guess. Is that your advice?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there.
All right, Jake. Well, thanks a lot. This has been illuminating. I appreciate it. Where can tell us a little bit about your company, and where can people find you and talk and find Treeline? Sure.
Well, our main offices are here in San Diego, but easiest way to get in touch is through the website. Take a look at the blog. We've been putting out a new IoT series, so touching on a lot of different topics from a business perspective and a down and dirty technical perspective. Nice. We got an email list on there, so you can sign up, kind of keep in touch with what's happening, the social channels, and then if you're ever down in San Diego, we're in the Mission Beach area, so drop us a line. We're here by the ocean and the bay, so we're nerding out, but we got a good view.
Nice. All right, Jake, thanks a lot.
Hey, have a good one.
Okay, well, that was episode number 35. For summary, links, and other valuable resources, go to the show analysis notes. Like usual, they can all be found at iot-inc.com/podcast. Well, now I could use your help. We're trying to get this show off the ground, and the best way to get discovered is with iTunes. So if you've enjoyed the episode or found it informative, I'd really appreciate a review. All you have to do is go to iot-inc.com/iTunes, and that'll redirect you to our iTunes page where you can let people know what you think by simply giving this show a star review or leaving a comment. I'd really appreciate that. If you'd like to learn more about the business of the Internet of Things, visit my media site. It can be found at iot-inc.com. There you'll find other podcasts as well as articles, videos, and information about upcoming live events like my stream meetups and webinars. If you want to access my network, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm connected with every guest I've had on this show, my video channel, and my meetup in the Silicon Valley. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Until next time, may your path to IoT business be a nerdy one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.